So today we have an '04 Dodge Ram. I'm sure it's a 2500, although the door emblem says 1500, but to my knowledge they never put that diesel engine in the 1500 series. So I suspect the door has been replaced, and that means the VIN number may not be correct either. But regardless, we're going to scan it for codes because it's got a transmission problem. It's apparently going into limp mode. Transmission fluid's been checked already, although I'm going to check it as well. So we'll set up the scan tool here and get ready to scan this thing. So the ID of the VIN number comes up as an '04 Dodge Ram 5.9. So we'll go ahead and do a scan on this thing and see if we've got well, let's go do an engine automatic transmission with air conditioning. If it was a manual transmission, you wouldn't have a problem. See if we got any codes in it to start with. Codes only. No codes present. Interesting. Let's see if there's anything in one trip. No codes present. Alright, well, we'll get set up here to do a road test and look at some data. Well, that's interesting. He didn't mention anything about this. Service 4-wheel drive. Brake warning light on. Oh well. Let's take it for a road test, see what the tranny does. So I took this Dodge for a road test down the highway, and here's a recording of data parameters from the transmission side of things. And what I noticed is at a steady state cruise, and in fact I was actually accelerating slightly, you can see about 80 kilometers an hour here, it shifted from fourth down to second, back to third, back to second, back to third, back to fourth, third, fourth, third, fourth, third, fourth. And if I play this in real time, play it back, there's second for, you can see this is real time, how fast it was shifting. And it did that a couple of times. This is the most obvious one here in the data recording. And at that time, the accelerator pedal did not change. Transmission temperature did not change. Brake switch status did not change. Output shaft RPM did not change. And the output speed sensor has been replaced in this thing already. TCC solenoid goes on and off because the torque converter clutch, I believe, only works in fourth gear. So if it's in fourth, it'll lock up. But if it's in third or second, it'll unlock. So you can see when it's locked up here, it's in fourth gear. So it's going on and off as well, and that's related. Now, I've had a problem with accelerator pedal signals or TPS signals on these Dodges, but usually on the older ones where there was a separate Dodge computer controlling the tranny and the Cummins computer on the side of the engine. This one has all of the electronics for the transmission and engine incorporated into the Cummins computer on the engine. I've had a look at the battery ground cables and body grounds on the fenders, and they look decent. I've lab scoped the alternator waveform. There's no anomalies there. I'm going to lab scope the accelerator pedal position sensor at the accelerator pedal and see if there's electrical interference in it, because that may be causing the unwarranted shifting. So we're going to have a look at a lab scope pattern of the accelerator pedal. So the accelerator pedal actually lives behind a plastic cover mounted to the left front corner of the engine. It's a 6-wire connector that plugs into the bottom of the accelerator pedal sensor, and the brown white wire on that corner is the APP signal. And is it the brown one? Yes. I have to double check the wire colors here. I had this in my head, but I'm trying to remember now. Yeah, the red and white is, believe it or not, the APP ground, and the brown and white is the APP signal. There are two idle validation switches in here, one normally closed, one normally open. So it's an analog sensor. We're going to lab scope both the ground and the signal wire coming out of this thing to see if we've got electrical interference on those wires. Okay, so I'm backpinning the brown-white wire, which is the APP sensor signal going from the sensor to the actual PCM or ECM, and it's sitting at 0.35 volts. And if I open the throttle, step on the throttle, you can see that the voltage rises. So key on, engine off, it's pretty clean, but we're going to start it up and have a look at it at an idle. So with it running, obviously, there is some electrical noise in there. And if I let that record for a few seconds, and then pause it, and zoom it up, you can see that it's not random. It's happening quite consistently. And I don't know where those electrical spikes are coming from. Kind of looks like an injector waveform. Well, I'm going to try putting a filter on that. That signal is like that on the ground of that sensor as well. So I've got this DTT noise filter that I had originally installed on a 98 Cummins on the TPS for a torque converter clutch hunting problem, and the guy's now no longer using that truck, so I managed to acquire this, which I believe is just a capacitor, and I've got it temporarily wired into the TPS signal wire down there at the accelerator pedal, and I'm going to start the truck and ground it and see if it cleans up the signal. So there is the original signal, and I'm going to put the ground wire on the battery. So there's a very small spike there, but it's cleaned up significantly with that wire grounded. Take the ground off, and the electrical noise comes back. Now it does not affect the actual baseline voltage, so I'm going to wire that DTT filter into that APP signal circuit and then reevaluate it. So it's still acting up, and I noticed the gear shift indicator switching from drive to second. And you can see the RPM doing what it's doing. I wonder if the position switch is causing a problem. It's in second gear right now, but it's like it's been manually put into second gear. Now it goes back into drive, now back into second. I didn't notice the shift indicator doing that before. This time it's actually stayed in second gear for several seconds. Now I see the brake warning light blinking randomly on and off. Service four-wheel drive indicator is on because the instrument cluster is out of a different truck, and it's looking for a transfer case controller that this doesn't have because it's a manual shift transfer case. So this is strange. I've got the transmission gear shift lever in drive, yet the indicator on the dash says it's in second. This is how I pulled in the driveway in second gear, yet there's no reason for that. If I put it into neutral, it indicates neutral. Put it into drive, it goes straight to second. Now it's gone back to drive. And that's what it'll do while you're driving down the highway, is it'll switch back and forth just like it is right now. and it'll downshift to second, then third, and second, and third, and then back to overdrive again. On the transmission data, it doesn't show what actual gear it's in. It actually just shows reverse drive or neutral. Now I put the gear shifter in neutral, reverse, park, reverse, neutral, and drive. There's no input to the PCM, as far as I can tell, that differentiates what gear it's actually been selected. So why would the gear shift indicator indicate second, and why would this thing downshift to second gear? There it goes. I'm sitting still, idling, and it's switching between drive and second. This is just screwed. Sitting here idling in the shop in drive, and it's saying second gear. Now it's saying drive. Oh boy. So I'm looking at a wiring diagram for the park neutral sense circuit from the ECM to the transmission range switch, transmission range sensor. And basically, as the data indicated, it's either in park or neutral or some other forward or reverse gear. So this input is simply telling the engine control module that it's not in park or neutral. Then there is another stepped resistance in that range switch that is an input to the instrument cluster, and that's what the instrument cluster uses to detect what manual lever position sensor or position you place the gear shift in. Now, that does not appear to be a direct input to the PCM, but you got to remember that the instrument cluster up here is networked with the PCM, so it could be sharing that information, and there's a possibility that when it sees the range sensor go to indicate second gear, that it's actually downshifting to second gear because it thinks you put the manual lever in second gear. I think we're going to have a look underneath at this range sensor. The other thing that's odd is when I start driving the truck, it runs good, or it seemed to work good for about 10 kilometers, and then it started to act up. So it seems to be temperature related as well. And it's only on this last road test that I noticed the gear shift indicator in the instrument cluster switching from drive to second and drive to second and drive to second at the same time that the transmission was downshifting. So definitely this is suspicious now. You know, the filter on the APP sensor signal did clean up the signal, but it doesn't appear that that was the cause of the downshifting for no apparent reason. Anyways, we're going to put it up in the air and have a look at this sensor and see if there's any corrosion in the connector, or maybe backpin it and read the voltage on this one wire here, pin 14. Well, that's, and we'll have a look at connector 131, wherever that's located under the hood. So C131 is in the right rear corner of the engine bay. This shows a gasoline engine, so it'll be in around the vacuum pump area, and the connector looks like a rectangular connector. That's connector location, connector view, C131. So it's a through-row connector, rectangular. Interesting, it says 5.7 diesel. That could be why it's got a problem. 5.7 diesel. I think it's a typo. Well, they couldn't find C141 up in the engine bay, so I decided to put it up in the air and have a look at this transmission connector on the transmission. And this looks very suspicious. We're going to clean this off. It looks like the terminals are pulled out of that connector, or the connector's broken or something. So get some compressed air and clean that off. and maybe have a look inside there. Well, even after it's cleaned off, it looks very suspicious. Let's have a look inside the connector. So this dark green and yellow is the transmission range sensor signal, stepped resistance signal to the instrument cluster. But this second wire from the end here, this yellow wire here, or a tan wire with the broken connector body, is the 5-volt reference for that sensor. This wire is the park neutral sense. They look clean on the inside, and the inside of this connector looks clean, but I'm not convinced that the terminals won't be compromised because the seals are broken out. I sprayed it off with brake cleans and looked in there, but I'm going to see if I can obtain a new connector pigtail and replace that and see if that addresses the problem. So I obtained a previously enjoyed connector from the auto recycling yard and spliced the top 2 wires, and the other 3 wires I just transferred. This one has a plug in it, and there's the old connector. Like I said, that second wire down, the one that's compromised there, is a 5-volt reference for the variable resistor for the gear shift position switch. So we'll see if this works now. Hopefully it's fixed. Well, I'd like to say it's fixed, but it's not. And now you notice the park indicator is not even illuminated. I put it in reverse. If I play with the shifter, a reverse will come in. Neutral, drive, and it's still jumping back and forth from drive to second. And when it does that, it downshifts to second. But also when I put it back in neutral, it does not indicate neutral sometimes. There's neutral. I should have ordered that switch on the side of the transmission. They have it in stock at the local parts store, but I didn't get it sent out. I'm going to lift this up again and graph the voltage from that sensor. So I realized I can graph the voltage in the instrument cluster data. So there it shows in park at 4.14 volts. When I put it in reverse, hard to do this with one hand. You get that spike, and then it drops to 3.16 volts, and it's actually indicating reverse now. There's neutral, and there's no indication on the instrument cluster that it's in neutral. And the voltage did not change. Here's drive, drops down to 1.65 on focus. And second drops down to 1.1, and first it goes right to 5 volts, and there's no indication of first gear on the cluster either. So I think that sensor switch step resistance is compromised, but I still don't know why it would make it downshift unless it's networked to the ECM. Like right now it's in reverse, or it's in park, yet the reverse indicator is blinking on and off occasionally, and the voltage is changing. That's park. That's in park, yet the indicator on the dash is showing neutral. So let's change out that stupid sensor. Hopefully that fixes the problem. So here are the active codes in the ABS system now. Rear speed sensor open and foundation brake, and I think that's why the brake warning light is on. I think the low fluid level sensor in the master cylinder is intermittent because of the way the light flickers. I'm going to try bypassing that switch. So in the schematic for that brake fluid level switch, it shows it as a simple switch. Yet if you read the troubleshooting chart here, it mentions that if the, I'll bring this chart up, it says disconnect the brake fluid level switch connector, check the connector, clean, repair, whatever.
put an ohm meter across it. Resistance should be 10,000 ohms with a full master cylinder reservoir. So it's a specific resistance, 9,500 to 10,500. Well, I didn't do that. What I did was I used a variable resistor box, and I dialed up 10,000 ohms across the connector, and the brake warning light is out. So I'm sure it's a low fluid level sensor in the master cylinder. The brake fluid warning light will come on if it's open circuit or shorted to ground. So you can't simply unplug it to get the light to go off like the old days. Because if I disconnect this or open this circuit here, that will turn on the brake warning light. So, need a master cylinder fluid sensor or switch in here, or check the float, make sure it's not sunk. Master cylinder's full. It looks fairly recently changed. Questionable anyways.